Hello, ladies and gentlemen, James here. I have a video that I want to show you, and it's going to be kind of shocking. And you ever heard the terminology, everybody is your kin, look like you ain't your kinfolk? Everybody in your skin ain't your kinfolk. Well, I'm about to tell you, that statement is true. There's always been a division among our people, among black people, and you're gonna be surprised. Remember the movie Glory, and it showed a lot of those black gentlemen that were in blue coats. Did you know that they were black soldiers that were fighting for the Confederate? Oh yeah, I'm about to show you something's gonna blow your mind. Here it is. They were on both sides of the war. They were helping out the whites and the Confederate, not just the blue coats.
The American Civil War was a divisive time that is very often misunderstood or misconstrued when viewed through the lens of modern society. Within the scope of this view, we are apt to miss the nuances of what led the
Copyright
individual man to march
1976.
off to war.
Teacher purposes only.
Oftentimes, when we speak of what caused the country to go to war, we are speaking to the intentions of the governments in those states, and not necessarily to what drove the common Southerner to war. Aside from the fact that more than half of the Confederate Army had been conscripted into service, there were a great many Confederate soldiers who joined the Confederacy in an effort to exert their right to defend their homes against an invading force. One such demonstration of this nuance can be found in the African American soldiers who joined with the Confederacy and fought to defend their communities. While there are numerous examples of this, one of the best documented is the case of Henry Brown. In Darlington, South Carolina, there is a marker dedicated to Henry Dad Brown, a local resident and free black man who served as a veteran in 3 American wars: the Mexican-American War between 1846 and 1848, the American Civil War between 1861 and 1865, and the Spanish-American War in 1898. Known affectionately as Dad, Henry Brown was born near Camden, South Carolina in 1830. While he was a free black man, how Brown came to obtain his freedom varies by account, with some holding that he was born into freedom, and others saying that he purchased his freedom and that of his wife, Laura Cannon Brown, who was one of the founders of the Macedonian Baptist Church. Prior to the war, Brown made a good living in Darlington, South Carolina, as a reputable brick mason, and owned a great deal of land, with holdings of more than 500 acres. Brown believed in spreading the wealth, apprenticing young masons, and offering financial help to those in need, regardless of their race. Perhaps owing to his sense of community, Brown willingly enrolled as a drummer with the Darlington Guards in 1861, and followed his fellow citizens into danger, fighting for the Confederacy when the Civil War broke out. Battlefield drummers played a key role in communication during the war, as verbal orders could easily be obscured by the sound of battle. During the war, Brown served as a musician, fighting in several battles on the line with the 8th and 21st South Carolina Infantry Regiments, including the 1st and 2nd Battle of Manassas, the 7 Days Battle, the Battle of the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, Sharpsburg, Chickamauga, and Gettysburg, to name a few. During the Battle of Manassas, on Sunday, July 21st, 1861, Brown captured a pair of Union drumsticks after his original drumsticks had been damaged, with one account saying they had been shot out of his hands, and he used those Union drumsticks for the remainder of the war. At the close of the war, Brown's reputation drew him into public service, and he was elected the coroner of Darlington County. However, his term of service was ended in resignation after Brown grew frustrated by the pervasive corruption and crooked dealing that characterized much of the Reconstruction period. Brown also went on to serve again as a drummer in the Spanish-American War in 1898. Henry Brown died in 1907 and was laid to rest beside his wife Laura at Cannon Cemetery, a small family cemetery. His funeral was attended by Darlington residents, both white and black, as well as the former Confederate veterans that Brown served with. His casket was covered in a Confederate battle flag, and members of the UCV acted as his pallbearers. These excerpts from the following articles mention the life and service of the Confederate veteran Henry Dad Brown from those who knew him personally, followed by a news account of his funeral. General W.E. James, on the occasion of Henry Brown's death, wrote the following. There was a funeral in Darlington Sunday afternoon, which whites and blacks attended in almost equal numbers. There were many ladies in the church, and the pallbearers were 12 of the leading white citizens of the town, headed by the Honorable C.S. McCullough, Mayor. The Darlington Guards acted as an honor escort, and the Reverend D.M. Fulton, pastor of the Presbyterian Church, conducted the services, assisted by the Reverend J.J. Jefferson of the Colored Presbyterian Church. A large representative concourse followed the remains from the humble little home to the grave, and when the last words were spoken, the bugler of the Darlington Guards sounded taps, and the soldiers fired a volley of 3 rounds over the still form of the newly made grave. And this, in brief, is the story of the funeral of Henry Brown, a black man who in his life had been true to all, white and black alike, and when the end came, there were many sorrowing eyes who were saddened at the death of a good man whose name has always been a household word for generations in Darlington. Henry Brown, familiarly and affectionately known as Old Uncle Dad Brown, died at his home here Saturday evening. His life was an example to his race and others, and his death, even though he had added nearly another score of years to the allotted span, is felt as a loss by the entire community. For Henry Brown, simple in his creed, untutored and modest in his sterling worth, accomplished in his devotion to principle, was above all things a man. He fought a good fight when men were needed to do the fighting, and he kept the faith amid reluctant and faithless ones upon whom the flames of service rested. Henry was never a slave, but came to Darlington from Camden when he was quite a little child. For more than 80 years he lived his life here, and his character and his deeds proclaimed in no uncertain tones that the Spirit animated him. The record of his years brought him to the respect and esteem of all, even as it reflected honor upon the unobtrusive man who always was equal to the promptings of conscience and to the calls of duty. Henry was a veteran of 3 wars, and he had more to say concerning his experiences on the field than in other things. But his best work was not done when he was a follower in the Mexican, Civil, nor Spanish-American wars. He had a hard battle to fight for principle and right, but his honest old heart was as brave as it was true, and he never faltered for one moment. He was as fearless a man as one could find. He did not know mental or physical fear in the honest simplicity of his true but rugged manhood. Fear of any kind was meaningless jest to him. As a businessman and citizen, Henry was of unusual worth. A brick mason by trade, he had all he could do, and he acquired a modest competency which was honestly gained and well recognized. He went to Charleston in 1861 with my company, the Darlington Guards, and served as a drummer throughout the duration of the war. He captured a pair of drumsticks at the Battle of Second Manassas, and it is doubtful if anyone had enough money to purchase those sticks. He was a member of the Darlington Guards until the day of his death, and accompanied this command on every journey except the last to Jamestown, when in failing health he followed them to the station in a last vain attempt to keep step with his comrades to the rhythmic tap of his own drumbeat. In writing this, I must recall how I once saw Uncle Dad do something which will better show what stuff he was made of than I can with any words. An old ex-Confederate soldier asked me once, some years ago, where Henry was, saying that he had promised to meet him at that place at 12 o'clock. I told him that Henry was working on Mr. Hewitt's stores and that it was not 12 o'clock yet, but a few minutes after 12, old Uncle Dad, 6 feet tall and with his bright eyes kindling with affection, met his old comrade of other years, and after a conversation lasting more than an hour, they parted, but not before old Uncle Dad, who knew not that someone was watching, had slipped a bill into the trembling hand of the old soldier, who took it most reluctantly. They parted, with old Dad looking affectionately with tears in his eyes at the tears streaming down the face of the old soldier. It was a $20 bill that Henry had given him, not the first one, as the old veteran told me. He said that the old drummer was helping to keep this old soldier and comrade out of the poorhouse. Henry would not.
There's another one. Not everybody's your kinfolk. You're gonna be shocked. Not just other people. You got people that look like you that still got that spirit, that's still under the Confederate flag. Black folks.
Hello and welcome to my channel. If you are a subscriber to my channel, welcome back and thank you for your interest and support. If you aren't a subscriber but you'd like to see more, please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you don't miss any new interesting videos. The purpose of my videos are to rediscover the true history of people of color throughout the world. By understanding that truth, hopefully all people will be able to heal. I truly believe that remaining in ignorance helps no one, except for those individuals that thrive on deception, power, and dominance. One more thing before I get started, and trust me, you don't want to miss the rest of this video, but this has to be said. The word race and what it's supposed to mean is not a real thing. It was created to divide and conquer. It's a social construct which was scientifically debunked long ago, yet we still use the term day in and day out. Now, I realize that I've used the term race in some of my videos, but that was only because it's a term that people are most familiar with when trying to make sense of different skin tones. I will be producing a video addressing the peopling of the world in the near future, so please stay tuned for that. I produce these videos not to divide people, not to say one skin complexion is better than another, but to write the historical record so we as human beings can move forward out of ignorance as a cohesive group, no one better than the other. Alright, so without further ado, this video is titled The Black Southern Confederacy. We have been given 120 plus years of propaganda that the South was controlled by white men, and the few black men that fought for the South did so on behalf of their masters. This, of course, is a lie. In this video, I'm going to show you that the American Civil War was fought by black men and white men on both sides of the conflict. Okay, let me show you what I'm talking about. For those of you that don't know, the Confederacy included the states of Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. Regarding the hierarchy of the Southern Confederacy, Jefferson Davis was the president and Alexander Hamilton Stevens was the vice president. The Confederacy was formed in 1861. However, on April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered his Confederate troops to Union General Ulysses S. Grant after 4 years of a costly and bloody war. Alright, so I think this first article will blow your mind, so please pay close attention. I'm going to start off right at the top with the President of the Southern Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. Okay, so this article is from the newspaperarchive.com, Philadelphia Evening Telegraph newspaper, dated October 6, 1886, page 8, column 1. Alright, so the title of this article is The Davis Family, the Residents in Canada, How the Members Live. So the article starts, Ottawa, CW, September 27th. After the late war, the Davis family, accepting Mrs. Davis, went to live in Canada, and they still live there. At the head of this family is Mrs. Howell, the mother of Mrs. Davis, and with her is a younger sister of the latter who is unmarried. The Davis family consists of 2 boys and 1 girl, all young, the eldest, a boy, not being over 14 years of age. With Mr. Davis, there's a young child not included in the above list. Mrs. Howell is a tall, stately old lady of about 60 years of age. She has brilliant black eyes, good features, and looks a little sallow from her age. Her hair is gray and still thick, and she wears nothing on her head. This gives her an air of dignity and simplicity. In manner, she is very affable and plain. Miss Howell, whose first name is Margaret, is a tall young lady of about 20 years of age. She has dark eyes, good features, and a clear olive complexion with dark brown hair. In manner, she is pleasing, and there is a strong resemblance between her and her her mother, the looks of both ladies are quite southern. Master Jefferson Davis is a fine boy of about 14 years of age. He is tall for his age and well-made, with dark hair, dark eyes, and good features. His skin is a rich brown, like that of all his family. He is now in college in Lennoxville, Canada East. Miss Margaret Davis is a girl of about 8 years of age, with eyes black as, I can't read that word because it's missing part of the first letter, and brown hair and good features. Her skin is a rich olive, like that of Mrs. Howell, her aunt. She is now at school in the convent of the Sacred Heart near Montreal. The last of the family to notice is Master William Davis, who goes by the name of Willie. He is a boy of 4 years of age, with gray eyes and light hair, and features promising to be aquiline like those of his father. He is deaf, so that one has to shout at him in speaking. Alright, so this is where I'm going to stop reading the article so we can go ahead and analyze it, although I must admit the rest of the article is very interesting. So let's break this down. Mrs. Howell is mother to 2 daughters, Mrs. Davis and Margaret. Mrs. Davis is Jefferson Davis's wife. As I mentioned previously, Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy. Okay, so the Davis family consists of 2 boys, 1 girl, and 1 other child. We saw that Mrs. Howell is listed as being a tall, stately old lady of about 60 years of age. She has brilliant black eyes, good features, and looks a little sallow from age. Remember, sallow means a yellowish complexion. Her hair was iron gray and still thick. Then there is Miss Howell, whose first name is Margaret. She is listed as a tall young lady of about 20 years. She has dark eyes, good features, and a clear olive complexion with dark brown hair. Then the article says that there is a strong resemblance between her and her mother, and also that the looks of both ladies are quite southern. So how I interpret the phrase looking quite southern means many southern women at that time had dark eyes, dark hair, and complexions that are sallow and olive. Sallow meaning yellow, and olive meaning brown. Alright, so let's get to the other children. The article says Master Jefferson Davis was a fine boy of 14 years of age. He is tall for his age and well-made, with dark hair, dark eyes, and good features. His skin is a rich brown, like that of all his family. Folks, is that sinking in? I'm going to go ahead and repeat that last part, like that of all his family. So let's go ahead and look at the next child, which is Miss Margaret Davis. She was a girl of 8 years of age, with eyes black as unreadable, and brown hair and good features. Her skin is a rich olive, like that of Miss Howell, her aunt. Alright, so let me reiterate what I just said. I said a rich olive. Okay, they didn't say regular olive, a rich olive, which means it's an enhanced color, a darker color. Alright, so looking at the last child, Master William Davis, he is 4 years of age, with gray eyes and light hair, and features promising to be aquiline like his father. He is also deaf. Wow, right? Weren't we taught that the Southern Confederacy was basically all white? Weren't we all told that only white people were in charge of the South? Aren't 99% of all the photos and paintings that we're shown in regards to the Southern Confederacy of white people? I'm not making this stuff up, folks. But there is a reason it's been left out of the curriculum. What I'm showing you here is that Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, had a black family. Let that sit with you for a minute. Remember, when I read the description of Master Jefferson Davis, the 14-year-old, it says he has a rich brown, not a light brown, not a sallow, a rich brown complexion like that of all his family. Please remember, words are key. That's why I'm emphasizing these important descriptive words, so that it really brings home what this family looked like. Folks, this war was not about black and white. This war was a fight about cultures, money, and power. Southern black men, black women, white men, and white women were fighting for their way of life. Of course, I think it was disgusting to fight to keep the institution of slavery. These people and that part of their culture were sick, but that was part of the Southern culture at that time. What I'm saying to you is, we have been lied to regarding who these people were and who had the power at that time in history. The reality was, the South was full of families of color that were wealthy plantation owners, statesmen, bankers, doctors, preachers, teachers, soldiers, farmers, etc. This is not to say the South was not overrun with Negroes that were enslaved. However, as I will explain later in the video, and I'm sure I've touched on in prior videos, Europeans of color at this time were not to be confused with American Negroes, aka Indians. I have over 25 articles of accounts of wealthy colored people and families in the South and Midwest, and that's not including wealthy video on those wealthy families of color in the very near future. Also, these photos we are shown today are not legitimate. These photos we are shown have been substituted by photos of white people. I think some folks watching my videos believe the photos and paintings of white people that I present are of people of color passing for white. That is not the case. The reason I show you these photos are to highlight and emphasize the contradictions between the descriptions that are written and the photos we are given representing these various historical figures. I believe the original photos and paintings, etc., have been destroyed or hidden away. Maybe that's one of the reasons why many southern states passed laws against Negroes learning to read. I just wanted to clear up this issue about photos I'm presenting going forward. Okay, I'm going to move on to another article, and this one is about Verena Davis, the wife of Jefferson Davis. This article is from the Army.mil website. Basically, it's the U.S. Army's website. Anyway, this article was published on January 30th, 2015 by Eric Durr, New York State Division of Military and Naval Affairs. Alright, so this article reads, Saratoga Springs, New York, October 8th, 2014. A university professor who is also a former government codebreaker and a retired college financial aid director teamed up to transcribe and decode the secrets in a 150-year-old Confederate diary discovered in the collections of the New York State Military Museum in Saratoga Springs, New York. The Military Museum is administered by the New York State Division of Military and Naval Affairs, the state agency which oversees the New York Army and Air National Guard. Written in 1863 and 1864 by Confederate Army Lieutenant James Marble, an officer in Company B, 6th Virginia Infantry, the diary records information about soldiers in his unit, items he's bought and sold, his African-American slaves, the faithfulness of other officers' wives, Confederate deserters, women, and military movements. You know, before I go forward reading this, I just wanted to comment where it says African-American slaves. Obviously, back in 1863 and 1864, the term African-American obviously was not used. But it also indicates that these folks writing this story want to portray that the people of color at that time were all from Africa. And that is far from the truth, as we are witnessing by all the videos that I'm producing, as well as other videos being produced that pertain to the same subjects. In essence, it's a way of disassociating European people of color from their heritage and American Negroes/Indians from their land. To keep some of this private, Melbone used a code of letters and symbols. Among that coded information is Melbone's speculation about race of Verena Davis, the wife of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Encoded in his diary, Melbone recorded that he saw her and that she was dark-complected and had a very, very brown skin, dark eyes, and high cheekbones, wide mouth. This was undoubtedly a reference to African-American features and possibly ancestry, said Dr. Ken Folkland, who broke the code. Again, you can see that reference to African-American. Alright, so it goes on to read further. In the slave-owning Confederacy of 1864, these musings would have been explosive statements, said Folkland, a Queens College associate professor of computer science and National Security Agency trained cryptographer. Folkland, who has decrypted other historic documents, said people used codes in their diaries to keep military information, gossip, and ruminations about sex a secret from prying eyes. Marmole's diary contained a little of each. So I'm not going to read the entire article. I just wanted to read the section on Verena Davis because the first article I read to you didn't specifically describe her appearance. But now you know how her children got their looks. Alright, so back to this article. Do you see where it says Marlbone recorded that he saw her and she was dark complected and had very, very brown skin, dark eyes, high cheekbones, and a wide mouth? Now they're saying that this was a reference to her African American features and possibly ancestry. However, I hope if you've been watching my video series, you realize that she probably came from a European family of color. There is also a possibility that she was mixed with indigenous American blood, aka Indian blood. So let's take a look at what photos Google has for Mrs. Davis. Let's see if they portray her with this very, very brown skin. These photos aren't even close to matching the description. So let's take a look at the Davis family children. I sure don't see a rich olive or rich brown skin on any of them. Maybe it's just me, but do you guys see it? All I see are very pale complexions. Let's look at a painting of Verena Davis in a pendant from the Smithsonian Museum. Again, do you see a very, very brown skin? How about a brown skin? How about a light brown skin? This is what I'm trying to reveal to you. These paintings photos are all bogus. Alright, so let's look at one more example of what Mrs. Jefferson Davis looked like. This page comes from the book, The Davis Memorial Volume, Our Dead President, Jefferson Davis, The World's Tribute to His Memory by J. William Jones, D.D., copyright 1889. Alright, going to page 313, this page goes on to read, Mr. Davis was received here with distinguished honors, and quarters were assigned him at the Spotswood Hotel, which then stood at the southeast corner of Main and 8th Streets, but was destroyed by fire December 25th, 1870. Here speeches were made, welcome after welcome extended, and crowds pressed forward to be introduced to Mr. Davis and the members of his family. Mrs. Davis was thus described. She is a tall, commanding figure with dark hair, eyes, and complexion, and strongly marked characteristics which lie chiefly in the mouth. With firmly set yet flexible lips, there is indicated much energy of purpose and will, but beautifully softened by the usual sad expression of her dark, earnest eyes. Her manners are kind, graceful, easy, and affable, and her receptions are characterized by the dignity, suavity, which should very properly distinguish the drawing room entertainments of the chief magistrate of a republic. So again, we can see that the author describes Mrs. Davis as tall, with dark hair, eyes, and complexion, 3 separate categories regarding her appearance. Well, there are many more written examples of what Verena Davis looked like, but now I want to move on to some more Confederates of color. Alright, so let's look at the Vice President of the Confederacy, Alexander H. Stephens. And this article comes from the Athens Weekly Banner, dated January 24th, 1908, page 3, first column. This article is titled Civilian Leaders of the Confederacy by John Good of Virginia, sometimes member of the Confederate Congress of the Virginia Session Convention of the Congress of the United States and President of the Virginia Constitutional Convention of 1901-1902. The article subheading reads Alexander H. Stephens, and the article goes on to read, the first I ever saw of Mr. Stephens was on the 22nd day of April, 1861. He had been sent as a commissioner by the government at Montgomery to negotiate a treaty of alliance, offensive and defensive, with the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I had the honor to represent the convention as a member of the committee appointed to receive him. It will be remembered that Virginia was, for a short time, an independent nation. She had seceded from the old nation, but had not accepted the new one, nor could she do so until a vote was had by the people upon the ratification or rejection of the ordinance of secession. Mr. Stephens impressed me at the time as a most remarkable man. In personal appearance, he was very slender, his complexion was swarthy, and he weighed less than 100 pounds. He had a metallic voice of far-reaching power and a wonderful penetration. Alright, for the sake of time, let's just get to the heart of it. Of course, this account takes place before Alexander H. Stephens becomes Vice President of the Confederacy. So, John Good, the author of the article, states that he met with Mr. Stephens, and he described his personal appearance as very slender, and his complexion was swarthy. In my opinion, the author didn't mention his hair color or eye color, but went right for the distinguishing feature, which was his complexion, aka skin color. Alright, so let's look at a photo of Alexander H. Stephens. This one was found on Google. Not seeing the swarthy complexion? Don't you all find it weird so far that these descriptions are published in many sources, but as I mentioned in previous videos, no one talks about these people's descriptions, only their deeds. Although, if they did happen to mention their descriptions, for some reason, and I say this facetiously, they generally talk about hair color and eye color, failing to mention their complexions, skin color, or hue. Maybe it's just that they don't want to get into a discussion about it. Alright, I'm going to take us away from these articles for a minute, so I can show you real quick that Mr. Stephens' swarthy complexion, and basically all swarthy complexions, generally refer to complexions assigned to people of color. Let me show you real quick what I mean. Again, I'm going to preface this. I'm not speaking about white people with tans. There's a huge difference, and as Judge Judy says, let's not play with each other. Now, I have plenty of viewers commenting on various videos stating that swarthy complexions are not assigned to people of color. They believe that swarthy complexions refer to either white people with dark hair and dark eyes, or white people that have tans from being outdoors. I'm not blaming these commenters for believing as they do, because they have been subject to the same rewritten history we all have been taught. However, I'm going to debunk that false narrative right now. I'm going to go through a couple examples real quick. Let's look at this article from the Indianapolis Journal dated July 12, 1895, page 4, fifth column. under the title About People and Things. Beginning in the third paragraph, it states, Mrs. Anna R. Woodbine of Omaha, described as a swarthy colored woman, has been named by the prohibitionists as one of the candidates for the regents of the state university. Now this next article is from the Indianapolis newspaper dated September 10th, 1891, page 2, fourth column. The title of this article is The Asphalt-Colored Hands Demand $1.75 per day for their labor. So the paragraph begins, at 1 o'clock today, about 100 swarthy Negro laborers employed to lay concrete work on the Virginia Avenue asphalt pavement threw down their tools and quit work. Okay, moving on. You'll love this one. This article is from the Savannah Morning newspaper dated February 21st, 1904, page 30, second to last column. The title of this article is The Romantic Story of the Douglas Family. I'm going to skip down to the fifth paragraph where it reads, being desirous of seeing the one who had done so signaling a service, the man was pointed out to the king by his color or complexion. In these words of the Gaelic tongue, Sholto de Glace, or Behold the swarthy colored man. Hence he was named Sholto the Douglas. The king royally rewarded him with grants of land and created him Lord of Douglas. Well, that was interesting, don't you think? Keep in mind, this is a major southern newspaper in Georgia, and it's 1904. Okay.
I'm gonna stop right there. But here's some other evidence. Watch this.
Confederacy for the express purpose of maintaining and protecting the
Okay, watch this. You ain't gonna believe this one.
participate in public institutions. All citizens are nationals, but not all nationals are citizens. The Confederate Constitution was vague on who could be a citizen, but Article 1, Section 2 specifically excludes from voting all people of foreign birth who aren't naturalized citizens of the Confederate States. The Dred Scott decision in the U.S. Supreme Court just 4 years earlier took citizenship away from all African Americans, and the CSA grandfathered in this legal doctrine. The term Confederate nationals refers both to citizens of the CSA and non-citizens who lived in the CSA, like freemen of color, slaves, and Native Americans. Most black Southerners were Confederate nationals, but not citizens. They were allowed to live there because society needed their labor, and needed them to occupy certain rungs on the social ladder so that other Southerners could be higher on that ladder than them. When a lot of other people say black Confederates, they're talking about black Confederate soldiers. They're talking about guys in gray or butternut uniform, with rank, and with guns, fighting battles against the bluecoats. That's the mental image that makes lost costers' mouths water, and which really intrigues people who are seeing or reading the term black Confederates for the first time. In this film, the term black Confederate simply means someone of African ancestry who was a Confederate national and who participated in the war on the rebel side in any meaningful capacity, including a small minority who were soldiers. That term would obviously exclude more than 180,000 Southern black men, most of whom were escaped slaves, who served in the Union Army, since they obviously rejected the Confederacy and fought to destroy it. When talking about black Confederate military personnel in this film, I'll make it clear by saying black soldiers, black sailors, or black militiamen. Let's just get this out of the way right now. Most black Confederates were not soldiers, although there were a lot of black Confederate nationals who saw a lot of combat in the capacity in which they worked. There are actually 6 different types of contributions that Southern black folks made directly to the war machine, not counting tending crops or working in the factories. There were black soldiers and naval sailors, which is numerically the smallest category. There were a lot more black militiamen than there were soldiers, and that figure is somewhere in the thousands. Then there were even more black Southerners in civilian labor battalions, or who worked as bodyguards, or as civilian contractors, and others who were Army civilians. Civilian contractors and Army civilians are not the same thing. The Confederate war effort heavily depended on each of these 6 categories at various points in time throughout the war. It also depended heavily on black slave labor in the fields to feed the rebel troops, and black labor in the factories to make weapons, ammo, clothes, and supplies. But nobody's arguing over the folks working in the fields or the factories. They're arguing over the extent to which black Southern men were combatants for the rebellion. When lay historians point to black Confederates, the examples they provide, once under closer scrutiny, usually fall into one of the other 5 categories besides soldier, despite a lot of laymen trying to pass these guys off as soldiers.
Original Confederate flag.
While there certainly are many similarities between the black soldiers, militiamen, labor battalions, body servants, civilian contractors, and army civilians participating in the rebellion, these 6 categories were not the same thing. That said, there is no doubt that without the massive region-wide powerhouse of African American labor, both in and out of combat zones, the Confederate war effort would not have been possible. End of story. This is the hard evidence for black Confederates. While it certainly helps to appreciate the complexity of the African American experience in the antebellum and wartime South, it does not make the Confederacy look good. We'll look at the black Southerners in the Confederate Army and some of the black sailors in the Confederate Navy in just a moment. First, it's important to get one thing straight so that no one walks away from this with the wrong idea. African American labor is a central and repetitive theme in the Civil War, especially when dealing with Southern society or the Confederate Armed Forces. It was so important to this experimental country that it was codified into the law of the land, more explicitly than in the United States Constitution that the rebel leaders rejected as not good enough. Article 1, Section 9 of the Confederate Constitution deals directly with slavery. Subsection 1 forbade the importation of new slaves from Africa, but we know from the Constitutional Convention and from the work of economic historians on that time period that this measure was to protect the high value of increasingly scarce and in-demand slaves, which only appreciated with time and scarcity. The real telling part is subsection 4, which says that no law denying or impairing the right of property in Negro slaves shall be passed. Article 4, Section 1 repeats that the property rights of slave owners will not be impaired. Section 2 makes it illegal for slaves to run away, while Section 3 holds that slavery will be protected in all states and territories belonging to the Confederate States.
They fought for that.
The Confederate Constitution literally mentions slavery more times than it mentions taxes, more times than it mentions the Army, Navy, and militia, and more times than it mentions any other kind of private property. They made slavery illegal to abolish and restated it multiple ways from multiple different legal angles. This is the Constitution to which Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and every Confederate soldier, sailor, Marine, and public official, from Jeff Davis down to the local dog catcher, pledged to protect and defend when they entered Confederate service. The institution of slavery was so important to the Confederates that they wrote it down in their Magna Carta and in other documents multiple times for posterity, and made copies back when they thought they would win the war. After the Constitution of the Confederate States of America, we can look at the various declarations of secession from the rebel states and territories for the reasons why they left the Union. The first state to secede was South Carolina in December 1860. That secession declaration immediately complains that the 14 northern states have consistently failed to uphold their constitutional obligation to protect the property of citizens of the southern slaveholding states. Decoding this and re-saying it in plain English, the northern states were exercising their states' rights to not recognize the fugitive slave laws or anyone's claim to human property, and this was oppressive to the southern states. The South Carolina Declaration also mentions slavery, labor, and service, as in servants, some 27 times, with the further 2 mentions of hostile forces inciting servile insurrection, meaning slave rebellions. The only mention of taxes in their ordinance is in relation to the 3/5 clause of counting slaves as population for congressional districts based on taxes paid by their owners. Let's look further at the Confederate states that actually allowed black men in the military or the militia at one time or another during the war. The Louisiana State Militia had the first regiment of black troops in the war, period. Louisiana's secession ordinance was very short and did not mention slavery. However, slavery was a central topic of discussion in the Secession Convention, and the state even sent commissioners to Texas to convince Texas legislators to secede to protect Southern institutions. When they mean Southern institutions, they're not talking about peach cobbler and sweet tea. The state of Alabama allowed mixed-race Creoles in the state militia. Right at the beginning of their secession ordinance, Alabama declared it was leaving the Union because Abraham Lincoln was elected and his party was hostile to slavery. Alabama then declared its intention to unify with the slaveholding states of the South. Now, in 1861, Lincoln was perfectly willing to leave slavery alone where it existed, including all of Alabama. This means the Alabama secession delegates saw the Republicans as hostile to slavery's extended presence outside the South. That being returning escaped slaves in the North to the South and allowing slavery in new territories out west. There is no mention in Alabama secession ordinance of taxes or tariffs. Quite a few black Georgians served in the Navy as junior enlisted sailors or were hired out to the Navy as civilian pilots. Georgia's secession document mentions slavery, labor, and servants a whopping 38 times. Plus, they threw the servile insurrection paranoia in the Declaration as well. There are 0 mentions of taxes or tariffs. Next, Virginia allowed black Southerners to serve in all-black units with white officers at the very end of the war. There's no mention of slavery in Virginia's secession ordinance as it's a very short legal document. However, it was definitely a central topic discussed in the Secession Convention. This is where Alexander Stephens said to the convention in his famous cornerstone speech, "The great truth, I repeat, upon which our system rests, is the inferiority of the African," and he followed that up with, "Subordination to the white man is his normal condition." Well, that's Virginia. Since this documentary series is about the Civil War in the Wild West, let's look at the reasons for rebel confederation in the Far West. In the Lone Star State and former Republic of Texas, in their secession ordinance, slavery is mentioned over 20 times, while taxes and tariffs are not mentioned at all. The delegates also declared Texas was joining the Confederacy for the express purpose of maintaining and protecting the institution known as Negro slavery, the servitude of the African to the white race within her limits, a relation that had existed from the first settlement of her wilderness by the white race, and which her people intended should exist in all future time. And all future time means forever, folks. Next, we have the Arizona Territory, which seceded under the provisional government after the original 7 states seceded, but before Virginia and the other border states joined the rebellion. The Arizona Secession Ordinance declares first a declaration that the Republican Party has violated the rights of the southern states. They actually put that in before declaring their own legitimate grievance that the U.S. government failed to protect them from Native American attacks, although in the document they used the term savages in our midst. Then near the end of the document, the Arizona delegates declare, "We will not recognize the present black Republican administration." Black men were not voting Republicans in 1860 because they weren't U.S. citizens, they weren't voting. When people in the 1850s and 60s said black Republicans, it was a slur for people who supposedly represented black folks but not Americans, meaning white-skinned Anglo-Americans. Not only did the Confederate government and its several states intend to preserve the institution of African slavery and subordination to white Americans, but they also aimed to expand the practice to new territories. With the exception of the relative few, very few African Americans who themselves became slave owners, the perpetuity and expansion of black slavery cannot be a cause that black Americans believed in, even if they felt deeply Southern and attached to their local community. It's important for me to say this and back it up with some of the most important primary sources of the Southern Rebellion. Because of the widespread disinformation and lost cause mythology that continues poisoning the well of public opinion. Even as recent as a week before I made this film, content creators are uploading pseudo-documentaries to YouTube and talking nonsense about the common patriotism of Southern black men to the Confederate cause, and of the mythical tens of thousands, maybe even 100,000 black Southerners who fought as Confederate soldiers. There is indeed ample evidence of many thousands of Southern black men in some type of uniform and serving or working in a combat zone, but again, most of them were not soldiers. They made their claim to a big piece of Civil War history, but they were also severely discriminated against, and their discrimination was a understand the odd paradox of black Confederates, we need to be able to tell the difference between black soldiers, black militia, and black civilian personnel attached to the Army in various capacities. Let's start with the black soldiers. With a few fascinating and remarkable exceptions we'll look at in just a moment, the only Confederate Army soldiers who were able to serve openly as black men were the black battalions recruited at the bitter end of the war. This was in March of 1865, when the law allowing black soldiers in the Army barely passed through Congress. A company's worth of African American Southerners from Richmond, mostly slaves, were recruited from among hospital workers into the Confederate States Negro Troops. This unit was designated the 1st Battalion of Negro Troops and was commanded by a white officer. This was the founding cadre, and the plan was to grow the unit to battalion strength, but it was only ever company strength with between 100 and 200 soldiers. To their credit, they were ideal recruits, since many were hospital workers and many had already seen battle as civilian ambulance drivers and hospital orderlies, evacuating wounded rebels from the battlefield, so they were no strangers to war. They also reportedly looked impressive when drilling outside in the public squares of Richmond. However, their barracks was a prison, and they were locked inside when not on duty, reflecting white society's lingering paranoia about slave insurrections. Oddly enough, these guys did spend a few days on the front line, but they didn't do much since most weren't armed. Ironically, they saw more combat as civilian laborers than they did as Confederate soldiers. Next, we have what the War Department hoped would be the 2nd Battalion of Negro Troops, and this unit was below company strength. This founding company, if you could call it a company, was commanded by Anglo-American Major Thomas P. Turner, and had a whopping 35 volunteers as of March 27th, just 2 weeks before Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. By volunteers, in many cases I mean slaves voluntold by their owners, some of whom believed fanatically in the Confederate cause and were willing to sacrifice some slaves either to death on the battlefield or freedom through military service in order to save the rebellion and keep the rest of their slaves forever. In other cases, there were slaves and freemen who wanted to use this as an opportunity for advancement, and as far as the slaves, their owners allowed them to go, with the owners collecting their pay. That said, Robert E. Lee complained in his letters in March of 1865 about so many slave owners in Northern Virginia being unwilling to lend their slaves to the Army to save their country. As far as the black Confederate soldiers of March 1865, their total military service for the CSA lasted just under a month. I still haven't encountered any evidence that they served long enough to ever get paid, not that their pay would have been worth much in 1865, but in either case, their owners would have collected their pay. Surely some of these volunteers did feel an affinity and strong emotional bond for their owners and for their local communities. Stockholm Syndrome and, in many cases, mixed-race family relations were a weird thing that often accompanied master-slave relationships. That said, one group existed for the benefit of the other, and not the other way around, and that one group did not have the freedom to leave this arrangement. There's plenty of evidence of the weird Stockholm Syndrome type relationship between body servants and their owners, but we know little about the enslaved soldiers who served in 1865. We can ascertain that many, if not most of the volunteers saw the writing on the wall just as well as the white soldiers who were deserting en masse since 1864. That the war was already lost, and that these black volunteers were fighting specifically to earn their freedom through military service, which they would have gotten either by completing their contracts with the rebel army or by being captured by the Union. This makes me respect those individual slaves for their willingness to go to war and risk their lives in battle to earn their sacred freedom. I don't mean freedom as in Confederate independence or Southern nationalism, but as in real, individual self-ownership and agency. That said, none of these inspiring acts by incredible black Americans in the South changed the fact that the Confederate States Army existed to protect and uphold the government created to preserve slavery and expand it to new territories. Let's look at one such soldier who was not from one of the black battalions recruited in March of 1865, because this example points us to a trend among a small minority of troops in the Army. John William Buckner was a free man of color who served in the 1st South Carolina Artillery. His grandfather, William Ellison, was an ex-slave who became a slave owner himself, and was described at age 29 as having a yellow complexion. that would indicate that he was mixed race, probably half Caucasian or Anglo or more, to give him a complexion with less melanin in his skin than his African ancestors. Buckner was the son of two light-skinned mixed-race slave owners, so he most likely had more European ancestry than he had African ancestry, and he was able to pass for white. He was one of probably thousands of mixed-race Southerners serving in the Confederate Army. I don't doubt the number of free men of color enlisted as soldiers throughout the war really was in the thousands, but most or all of these guys were passing for white. Roughly 1 million Southern men served in the Confederate Army, so the presence of thousands of free men of color passing for white does nothing to change the fact that the Confederate Army was the army of the Republic that existed specifically to preserve black slavery and expand it to new territories. How do we know the free men of color serving as soldiers before 1865 were passing for white? We know because Article 46, Section 1399 of the Confederate Army Regulations, which anyone can go read online right now, unmistakably required soldiers to be white, while non-white personnel were only allowed to be musicians, cooks, or civilian contractors in other regulations. In some cases, like John William Buckner's, where mixed-race soldiers passed for white, other people knew about it but kept their mouths.
We can't stop it.
Alright then, well that was interesting. I don't want to bore you with the long presentation, but yeah, there were black soldiers that were fought for the Confederacy. So I wanted to say this is that not every black folks is your kinfolk, and that spirit still runs to this day. What was back then among people, whether they were white, whether they were black, it's the same spirit. You have some black people that would, I've seen it myself on video with the Confederate flag. Like, oh, that's part of their heritage. I've seen black people do it. So, even though we know what the flag stand for, but they're conditioned for generations to feel the same way down there. But anyway, I just wanted to chime in on this video. It was really, try not to make it too long, but it was really interesting. So when I say you have to come together, you have to be in like-minded. If you're not like-minded individuals, because not every black person is going to want to see the same thing, because they're going to object to you and appease their masters, so to speak. And so, something to think about. So, really, it's about their so-called Southern heritage. And black people got adopted to being part of that Southern heritage. So you know, if they were fighting with against the white blue coats was white men, they were probably fighting against other black men in blue coats, because they fought on both sides of the war. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. And one was the gray coats wanted to maintain slavery. I don't understand the black people back then that joined. Why would you join something that would want to maintain slavery? To keep you in slavery. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and cut this video short. I was trying to find this video where it's still people still walking around with that mindset today. There's some black people that's probably right along with their white counterparts in the South, different places in the South, small towns that still, they don't mind being seen with the Confederate flag. And you'd be surprised, be black women like that. Alright then. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Till next time, you guys take it easy, be blessed, and just another insight into the American black men and women here and international. Okay then, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a good one. And this is just to educate you about the world in the past and the present time. Alright then, take care and be blessed.